Okay, let's talk a little Federalist 70, written by Alexander Hamilton. Federalist 70 is a fairly lengthy essay, but there's one major overriding point that Hamilton is making, namely that there should be what he referred to as an energetic executive. So the ingredients which constitute energy in the executive are: first, unity; secondly, duration; thirdly, an adequate provision for its support; fourthly, competent powers. So, and again, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this one because based on your argumentative essays that were signed, it looks like a lot of you already pretty much understand it. But it really boils down to this. There were some who argued that there should be some sort of executive council, and so going back to the this idea, unity. Okay, one person is how you would translate that idea. If you have more than one person trying to function in some sort of executive capacity, it is really, really difficult, and a lot of bad things happened. Namely, that people would not take responsibility for the decisions that are being made, or they would blame each other. When you have one person in charge, there's no question who's in charge. And here in paragraph 10, the experience of other nations will afford little instruction on this head. However, as it teaches us anything, it teaches us not to be enamored of plurality in the executive. So, and he goes on to give some historical examples. This is a good little line. Whenever two or more persons are engaged in any common enterprise or pursuit, there is always the danger of difference of opinion. If it be a public trust or office which they are clothed with equal dignity and authority, there is peculiar danger of personal emulation and even animosity. From either, and especially from all these causes, the most bitter dissensions are apt to spring. Whenever these happen, they lessen the respectability, weaken the authority, and distract the plans and operations of those they divide. So this is really kind of the big deal with why you should have one person in charge. When you have more than one person, it speaks to weakness, blame shifting, things like that. And again, just furthering that argument, I don't know that we need to go through all these paragraphs necessarily, but one of my favorite lines in Federalist 70 is in paragraph 16. One of the weightiest objections to a plurality in the executive, in which lies as much against the last as the first plan, is that it tends to conceal faults and destroy responsibility. So you may not like the decisions of the president, but at least you know who the president is and who's making those decisions. If you had more than one person working as an executive, it would be impossible to determine who to blame if something goes wrong, for example. So again, just reiterating that idea that a one-person executive is the way to go. Okay, then paragraph 18. It is evident from these considerations the plurality of the executive tends to deprive the people of the two greatest securities they can have for faithful exercise of any delegated power. First, the restraints of public opinion, which lose their efficacy, as well on account of the division of the censure attendant on bad measures among a number, as on account of the uncertainty on whom it ought to fall. And secondly, the opportunity of discovering with facility and clearness the misconduct of the persons they trust. An executive council is a recipe for never assigning fault when something bad happens. Similarly, you can never give credit when something good happens because you don't know who is actually making the decisions. So not to belabor this point, but that's really the main thing that he was arguing, was that there should be one person in charge. All right, and finally, in the last paragraph here, he basically just almost makes a common sense argument, saying, I rarely met with an intelligent man from any of the states who did not admit, as a result of experience, that Unity of the executive of this state was one of the best of the distinguishing features of our Constitution. So, and again, going to the summative on Federalist 70. Hamilton argues for a singular executive characterized by energy, and you can see some of the main ideas. Makes it possible to act quickly and decisively in matters of national security. So particularly in a war footing, or maybe something like we're going through now, you want one person that can make decisions. Now I'm going to add one thought in analyzing Federalist 70 that I'm not sure we spent a lot of time on. We did talk about that there are relatively few formal powers. This does not mean the president is weak. Quite the opposite, in fact, because many of the powers of the president are derived from the informal powers that have evolved over time, namely the bully pulpit, the ability to set the agenda, and other things that have popped up, executive orders, things like that. So in light of this idea that the president today is a lot more powerful than perhaps they thought, it makes you wonder if the founding fathers had known what we know now about presidential power, if they would have made any different kinds of arguments. But I guess we'll never know. Anyway, so that's Federalist 70.